Unmute. Part 4. A New Life Far From Home. Chapter 14. A Place Called Birmingham. I woke up on October 16th to a lot of people standing around looking at me. They all had 4 eyes, 2 noses, and 2 mouths. I blinked, but it did no good. I was seeing everything in double. The first thing I thought was, thank God I'm not dead. But I had no idea where I was. The people were speaking English, and since I did too, I tried to talk, but no sound came out. A tube of some kind was in my throat. It had stolen my voice. I was in a high bed, and all around me, complicated machines beeped and purred. I understood then. I was in a hospital. My heart clenched in panic. Where were my parents? Were they hurt? Something had happened to me, I knew. I was sure something had happened to my father as well. A nice woman wearing a headscarf came to my side and began to pray in Urdu. Listening to the soothing, beautiful words of the Holy Quran, I closed my eyes and drifted off. When I opened my eyes next, I was in a green room with no windows and very bright lights. A doctor spoke to me in Urdu. His voice was muffled, but I understood enough to hear that I was safe and that he had brought me from Pakistan. I tried to talk but couldn't. A nurse gave me a piece of paper and a pen, but I couldn't write properly. So the nurse wrote the alphabet on a piece of paper and I pointed at letters. The first word I spelled out was father, then country. Where is my father? I wanted to know. And what country was this? The doctor's voice was still hard to hear, but he seemed to be saying that I was in a place called Birmingham. I didn't know where that was. Only later did I figure out it was in England. Why hadn't he said anything about my father? I moved to spell out father again, and a pain cut through my head. It was as if 100 razors were inside my skull, clattering and rattling around. I tried to breathe. The nurse dabbed at my left ear, and blood came away on the cloth. Why was my ear bleeding? What had happened to me? Nurses and doctors came in and out, asking me questions. I nodded and shook my head in reply. They asked if I knew my name. I nodded. They asked if I could move my left hand. I shook my head. They had so many questions, and yet they wouldn't answer mine. A lady walked in and told me her name was Dr. Fiona Reynolds. She spoke to me as if we were old friends. She handed me a green teddy bear, which I thought was an odd color for it, and a pink notebook. The first thing I wrote was thank you. Then I wrote, why I have no father. And as I looked around the room at all the complicated medical equipment, I wrote, my father has no money. Who will pay for this? Your father is safe, she said. He is in Pakistan. Don't worry about the payment. If my father was safe, why wasn't he here? And where was my mother? The words I needed would not come to my mind. She seemed to understand. Something bad happened to you, she said, but you're safe now. What had happened? I tried to remember. During those first days of being in the hospital, I drifted in and out of a dream world. All sorts of images floated through my head. I see a crowd gathered around me as I lie on a bed, or maybe a stretcher. I can't see my father, and I'm trying to cry out, where is Abba? Where is my father? But I can't speak. And then I see him, and I feel joy and relief. I'm on a stretcher, and my father is reaching out to me. I'm trying to wake up to go to school, but I can't. Then I see my school and my friends, and I can't reach them. These images seemed very real, yet I knew they couldn't all be. But somehow I had ended up in this place called Birmingham, in a room full of machines, with only the green teddy bear at my side. I thought I had been shot, but I wasn't sure. Were those dreams or memories? I couldn't remember words either. I wrote to the nurses asking for a wire to clean my teeth. Then I saw that my green teddy bear was gone. A white one had taken its place, but the green teddy had been by my side. He had helped me. I took the notebook and wrote, "Where's the green teddy?" No one gave me the answer I wanted. They told me it was the same teddy that Dr. Fiona had given me. The lights and walls had given him a green glow, but the teddy was white, they said. He was always white. The bright lights in my room were like hot daggers to my eyes. "Stop lights," I begged in my notebook. The nurses did their best to darken the room, but as soon as I got some relief from the pain, my mind kept spinning back to the same question. Where was my father? Every time a different doctor or nurse came into my room, I handed them the notebook and pointed to the questions about my father. They all said not to worry, but I did worry. I couldn't stop. I thought for sure that the doctors and nurses were all saying, "Malala doesn't have any money. Malala can't pay for her treatment." One doctor always looked sad, so I wrote him a note. "Why are you sad?" I asked. I thought it was because he knew I couldn't pay, but he replied, "I'm not sad." "Who will pay?" I wrote. "We don't have any money." "Don't worry," he said. After that, he always smiled when he saw me. Dr. Fiona came into my room and handed me a newspaper clipping. It was a picture of my father standing next to the Pakistan Army's chief of staff. My father was alive, and in the background of the photo was a tall. I smiled, feeling thankful. Then I noticed a figure in a shawl sitting in the back of the photo near my brother. I could just make out her feet. Those were my mother's feet. "That's my mother," I wrote to Dr. Fiona. I slept a bit better that night, though it was still a sleep full of strange dreams. I would wake up and look around for the green teddy, but it was always just the white one. Now I knew my family was Now that I knew my family was safe, I spent all my time worrying about how we would pay for my treatment. Was my father at home selling our few possessions? Was he calling on his friends to ask for a loan? When the man had spoken to me in Urdu, Dr. Javid Kayani came in with his cell phone and said, "We're going to call your parents." I couldn't believe it. "You won't cry," he said firmly but kindly. "You will be strong. We don't want your family to worry." I nodded. I hadn't cried once since I'd arrived. My left eye was constantly weeping, but I had not cried. After a series of blips and beeps, I heard my father's dear and familiar voice. "Johnny," he said, "how are you feeling, my Johnny?" I couldn't reply because of the tube in my throat, and I couldn't smile because my face was numb. But I was smiling inside, and I knew my father knew that. "I'll come soon," my father said. "Now have a rest, and in 2 days we will be there." His voice was loud and bright, maybe a little too bright. Then I realized he had also been told not to cry. Chapter 15, 100 Questions. I wrote a new note in my pink diary. Mirror. When I got my wish, I was surprised by what I saw. Half of my head was shaved, and my long hair was gone. Stitches dotted my left brow. A huge purple and yellow bruise surrounded my left eye. My face was swollen to the size of a melon, and the left corner of my mouth turned down into a frown. Who was this poor, strange-looking Malala? And what had happened to her? "Now my hair is small," was all I could write. Had the Taliban shaved my head? I'd wondered. Who did this to me? I wrote, my letters scrambled. What happened to me? Dr. Fiona said what she always said. Something bad happened to you, but you're safe. But this time it wasn't enough. Was I shot? I wrote. I couldn't move the pencil fast enough to keep up with my questions. Had anyone else been hurt? I wondered. Had there been a bomb? Frustrated, I started to squirm. I saw the cell phone on Dr. Fiona's belt and signaled to her that I wanted it. I mimed dialing a phone on my palm, then brought the phone to my ear. Dr. Fiona placed a gentle hand on my wrist. She began to speak slowly and calmly. You were shot, she said, on the bus, on your way home from school. So they did it, I thought. The Taliban really did what they said they would do. I was furious. Not that they'd shot me, that I hadn't had a chance to talk to them. Now they'd never hear what I had to say. 2 other girls were hurt, Dr. Fiona said, but they're all right. Shazia and Kayant. I didn't recognize those names. Of course, if I did, I couldn't remember who these girls were. She explained that the bullet had grazed my temple near my left eye and traveled 18 inches down to my left shoulder, where it stopped. It could have taken out my eye or gone into my brain, she said. It's a miracle you're alive. I tried to speak to her, but I remembered I couldn't, so I looked back at the mirror. I will admit that I used to be sensitive about my looks. I had thought that my nose was too big, my skin too dark, even my toes were too long. But I looked at this Malala in the mirror with nothing but curiosity. I was like a scientist, studying a specimen. I wanted to understand exactly where the bullet went. What exactly had it done? I wasn't saddened by what I saw. I wasn't scared. I just thought, it doesn't matter what I look like. I am alive. I saw that Dr. Fiona had put a box of tissues between us and realized that she'd been expecting me to cry. Maybe the old Malala would have cried, but now the funny face in the mirror was simply proof that I was still here on this earth. I wanted to learn more. Had the bullet passed through my brain? Was that why I couldn't hear properly? Why couldn't I shut my left eye? I had 100 questions for Dr. Fiona, but I only asked one. How soon can I go home? I stared at the clock in my room while I waited for my family. Watching the hands move around the dial reassured me that I was indeed alive. It also helped me measure off the minutes until my family arrived. The clock had always been my enemy at home, stealing my sleep in the morning when all I wanted to do was hide under the blanket. Wait until my family heard that I had finally made friends with the clock, and that for the first time in my life, I was waking up early. Every morning I waited eagerly for 7 a.m. when friends like Yama, who worked at the hospital, and nurses from the children's hospital would come and help me pass the hours. When I could see well enough, they brought me a DVD player and a stack of DVDs. They had turned on the TV during my first days, but my vision was still so blurry that I had asked them to turn it off. Now my eyesight was better, although I was still seeing double a bit. So I got to choose from Bend It Like Beckham, High School Musical, Hannah Montana, and Shrek. I chose Shrek. I loved it so much I watched the sequel right after. One of the nurses figured out that if she covered my damaged eye with a cotton patch, my double vision wasn't as bad. So I passed the day with a green ogre and a talking donkey and waited for my parents to come to England. After a few days in the hospital, the tube in my throat was removed, and I got my voice back. So I began asking Dr. Fiona my questions. It was like being back in biology class at school. I learned that back in Pakistan, The doctors told my parents that I wouldn't survive unless I was moved to a better hospital. My parents agreed to let me go with Dr. Javid and Dr. Fiona. The two doctors, who happened to have been in Pakistan for other work and were brought in to help treat me, had been by my side for nearly 2 weeks. No wonder they had behaved as if they'd known me forever. I wanted to know one last thing. I was in a coma, I said. For how long? A week, Dr. Fiona told me. I had missed a week of my life, and in that time I'd been shot, I had an operation, and I had been flown to the other side of the world. The first time I had ever flown outside of Pakistan was on a private jet to save my life. The world had gone on all around me, and I knew nothing about it. I wondered what else I had missed out on. Chapter 16, Filling in the Blanks. My father had told me on the phone that he would be by my side in 2 days, but 2 days turned into two more. Dr. Javid arranged another call to Pakistan. My father promised that the whole family would be there soon, just one more day. I didn't believe they were actually coming until Dr. Javid tilted up my bed so I would be sitting to greet them. By then, it had been 16 days since I had run out of my house in Megora. I had been in 4 hospitals and traveled thousands of miles. During this time, I had not cried once, not when the nurses removed the staples in my head, not when their needles pricked my skin, not when the lights was like a dagger in my eyes, but when the door opened and I heard familiar voices saying Johnny and Pisho, and when everyone fell upon me, weeping and kissing my hands because they were afraid to touch me. Finally, I cried. I cried and cried and cried some more. Oh, how I cried. For the first time in my life, I was even happy to see those annoying little brothers of mine. After 16 of the most frightening days of our lives, we were all together again. My parents tried to hide their concern about me, but I could see it in their eyes. Who could blame them? I knew from looking in the mirror that half my face was not working and half my hair was gone. As soon as I spoke with Atal and saw his surprised face, I realized how strange I sounded. I was still speaking, only in simple baby sentences, as if I were 3 years old. Don't worry, I wanted to say. The old Malala is still in here. I smiled to try to reassure them, but a shadow darkened on my mother's face. I thought I was grinning, but my parents saw something that looked like an awkward, crooked frown. Everything is fine. We are all here now, my father would say when I asked about what had happened to me. Then he would try to change the subject, and I would let him. But one day, when we were alone, he grasped my hand, his eyes filled with tears. Johnny, they threatened me many times. You have taken my bullet. It should have been me. And then he said, people experience both joy and suffering in their lives. Now you've had all the suffering at once, and the rest of your life will be filled with only joy. He could not go on. I longed to tell him that I wasn't suffering, and that I didn't want him to suffer either. I smiled my crooked smile and said simply, Abba. It was so unfair that my poor injured brain couldn't come up with the words for the person I loved so much. But my father understood. He smiled back through teary eyes. A little while later, my mother was helping me in the bathroom when I saw her sneak a look at my reflection in the mirror. Our eyes met for a moment, then she looked away. Then came a whisper. Your face, she said. Will it get better? I told her what the doctors had told me. My face would eventually improve, but it would never quite be the same as before. When she walked me back to my bed, I looked at my parents. It's my face, I said, and I accept it. Now, I said gently, You must accept it too. There was so much more I wanted to say to my parents. I'd had time to get used to my new face, but it was a shock to them. When you see death, I wanted to say, things change. It didn't matter if I couldn't blink or smile. I was still me, Malala. I knew my recovery was a blessing, a gift from God and from all the people who had cared for me and prayed for me. So I was at peace. But while I was in Birmingham healing, watching Shrek and his talking donkey, my poor parents had been thousands of miles away, suffering their own terrible pain. From that day on, our family began to heal together. My parents slowly filled me in on what happened in those 16 days between the shooting and our reunion. What I learned was this. As soon as the bus driver, Usman Bah John, realized what had happened, he drove me straight to Spot Central Hospital. The other girls were screaming and crying. I was lying on Moniba's lap, bleeding. That day, my father was at a meeting of the Association of Private Schools, where he was giving a speech. When he learned about what had happened, he rushed off to the hospital. He found me inside, lying on a stretcher, a bandage over my head, my eyes closed, my hair spread out. My daughter, you are my brave daughter, my beautiful daughter, he said to me over and over, as if saying it could waken me. I think that, somehow, I did know he was there, even though I was not conscious. The doctors told my father that the bullet had not gone near my brain and that the injury wasn't serious. Soon, the army took charge, and by 3 p.m., I was in an ambulance on the way to a helicopter that would take me to another hospital in the city of Peshawar. There was no time to wait for my mother, so Madame Miriam, who had arrived at the hospital soon after my father, insisted on coming in case I needed a woman's help. Don't cry, my mother had said to our tearful neighbors. Pray. As the helicopter flew over our street, she rushed up to the roof. She took her scarf off her head, a rare gesture for a Pashtun woman, and lifted it up to the sky. God, I entrust her to you, she said. Pakistani TV channels showed pictures and videos of me with prayers and poems. Poor Atal turned on the TV after school, heard the news, and realized that if he hadn't had a tantrum about riding on the tailboard, he would have been on that bus too. Meanwhile, I was in Peshawar, where a doctor had discovered that my injuries were quite serious. He operated on me, and then the two British doctors, Dr. Fiona and Dr. Javid, took over my case. Dr. Fiona insisted that I would receive the best care at Dr. Javid's own hospital in Birmingham, England, Queen Elizabeth Hospital. But I needed to be moved immediately, within 2 days. My family couldn't go with me. Dr. Javid assured my father that I would be taken care of. Isn't it a miracle you all happened to be here when Malala was shot? My father said. It is my belief God sends the solution first and the problem later, replied Dr. Javid. I had missed so much, and yet, as my parents told me everything that had happened and that the whole world knew about it, it was almost as if they were telling me a story, that these things had happened to some other girl, not me. Perhaps that's because I do not remember a thing about the shooting, not one single thing. The doctors and nurses had complicated explanations for that. The brain protects us from memories that are too painful to remember. Or, they said, my brain might have shut down as soon as I was injured. I love science, but I don't need it to know why I don't remember the attack. I know why. God is kind to me. People don't understand when I say this. I suppose unless you have been close to death, you cannot understand. But death and I have been very close, and death, it seems, did not want me. When I finally watched the news, I learned that a spokesman for Fazula said that the Taliban had been forced to shoot me because I would not stop speaking out against them. They had warned me, they told the press, but I wouldn't stop. My other crimes? I spoke for education and peace. In their terms, I was speaking for Western education, which was against Islam, in their opinion. The Taliban would try to kill me, would try again to kill me, Fazula said. Let this be a lesson. It was a lesson indeed. My mother was right when she quoted from the Holy Quran. Falsehood has to die. She had told me all those years earlier when I was considering doing the blog for BBC, and the truth has to come forward. Truth will always triumph over lies. This is the true Islamic belief that has guided us on our journey. The Taliban shot me to try to silence me, but the whole world was listening to my message now. Chapter 17, Messages from Around the World. One day, I received a bag of cards. It was around the time of Eid al-Zula, Big Eid, one of the holiest of Muslim holidays. So I thought, how nice, friends have sent me cards for Eid. But how did they know where I was? I wondered. Then I noticed the postage dates, October 16th, October 17th. These were the days soon after the shooting. The cards had nothing to do with Eid. They were from people all over the world wishing me a speedy recovery. Many were from children. I was astonished at how many cards there were. I learned that there were 8,000 cards and letters for me. Some were addressed simply Malala, Birmingham Hospital. One was addressed Girl Shot in the Head, Birmingham. There were parcels too, boxes of chocolate and teddy bears of every size. Most precious of all, perhaps, was a parcel sent by the children of Benazir Bhutto. Inside were 2 scarves that had belonged to their mother, who was the first female prime minister in the Islamic world and one of my biggest role models. Apparently, many people had tried to visit me, journalists, celebrities, and a number of politicians, but the hospital had kept them away so I could heal in private. But now I saw that famous actors and singers had tweeted about me and had wished me well on Facebook. It was exciting, overwhelming, and, because my brain was still not working right, confusing. How did these celebrities even know who I was? While I was in a windowless room, unaware of what was happening in the outside world knew exactly what had happened to me. I learned that more than 200 journalists from around the world had come to the hospital to see me. Except for that one day when I tried to watch the BBC, I hadn't seen the news since I had arrived. But now I understood. I was the news. How amazing. While I was feeling so alone in this hospital, wondering about my family, worrying about how we would pay for my care, people from all around the world were worrying about me. I didn't feel so lonely anymore. I couldn't wait to get home and tell Maniba about the celebrities. In December, after nearly 2 months inside hospitals, I was finally permitted my first trip outside, to the Birmingham Botanical Gardens. My mother and I went with 2 nurses. My father didn't go. He had become so recognizable from TV that he was afraid he would attract cameras. On the way, I sat in the back seat of the car, turning my head from side to side, overjoyed to take in everything in a country that was brand new to me. I wasn't used to the harsh wind and crisp cold air, but the plants, they were gorgeous and familiar. This one is in my valley too, I told one of the nurses. This one too. My mother was so excited, she called my father. For the first time, she said, I am happy. By this time, my family was living in an apartment in a tall tower in Birmingham and visiting me every day. And in a sure sign that life was getting back to normal, my brothers were driving me crazy. After about a day of treating me like a china doll, they were back to being annoying. "What is all this fuss over, Malala?" said Atal. "I have seen her. She survived." "Leave those two at home," I begged my parents. "They do nothing but make noise and try to take the gifts I've received." I was finally able to read again, and my language and memory started to come back, too. Though I still had a hard time remembering some of my friends' names, I was making steady improvements, and my spirits got better every day. Also that month, I had my first visitor from outside the family, Asif Allah Zaredi, the president of Pakistan. The hospital was afraid that the visit would attract too much attention from reporters, but it was an essential one. Mr. Zaredi had pledged that the government would cover all of my medical costs. I was bundled up in a purple parka and snuck out of the building through the staff exit. We drove right past a flock of journalists and photographers, and they didn't even notice. It was like something out of a spy novel. We were driven to some kind of office, and while we waited, Atal, Kushul, and I played a computer game called Elf Bowling. This was my first time playing it, and I still beat both of them. More proof that the old Malala was back. When the president came in, he laid a hand on my head, a gesture of respect in my country. He told us he had arranged for my father to have a job in Birmingham. Everything would be fine, he said. My job was to concentrate on my recovery. Afterward, Mr. Zaredi said I was a remarkable girl and a credit to Pakistan. It was an amazing day. The leader of my country was treating me with respect, and all my worries about money were lifted. But oh, it was a bittersweet day too, because I understood we would not be going home for a long time. Chapter 18, Miracles. Finally, I was released from the hospital and Finally, I was released from the hospital, and 2013 was off to a happy start. It was so good to be home with my family, even though this home was an apartment in a tall building with an elevator. I would have given anything to really be home. But what mattered most was that my family was finally together again. I tried to build up strength by walking in the brisk air, but I still couldn't hear properly. So I was constantly turning this way and that to see what was going on. A simple trip to the grocery store could be overwhelming and fascinating. In Birmingham's cafes, we saw men and women talking together in a way that would be unimaginable in SWAT. And the women wore tiny shorts, bare legs, and high heels, even in winter. "Are their legs made of iron so they don't feel the cold?" asked my mother. I missed home terribly. I missed my school friends. I missed the mountains, the waterfall, the beautiful Swat River, and the lush green fields. So it came as hard news when I found out that some people in Pakistan were critical of me. People who questioned our family's honesty. People who even said my father had shot me as a stunt so we could live overseas in luxury. The other news was from school. Over Skype, Moniba told me that she missed me and how no other girl could take my place in her heart. She also told me that Shaiza and Kanit were recovered and back in school. And she told me my friends were still saving a seat for me in class. "Oh, by the way," she said, "you scored a 100% on your Pakistani studies exam." That test I'd taken the morning of the shooting. I had many surgeries, including one to improve my hearing. A tiny electric hearing aid was placed behind my ear. A few weeks after that, I was fitted with a receiver, and then I heard a tiny beep, then another. Then came the sound of the doctor's voice. At first, everyone sounded like a robot, but soon my hearing got better. How great God is! He has given us eyes to see the beauty of the world, hands to touch it, a nose to experience all its fragrance, and a heart to appreciate it all. But we don't realize how miraculous our senses are until we lose one. The return of my hearing was just one miracle. A Talib had fired 3 shots at point blank range at 3 girls in a school bus, and none of us were killed. One person had tried to silence me, and millions spoke out. Those were miracles too. Chapter 19, This New Place. We have settled now into our Birmingham life in a tiny brick house on a tree-lined street. It is lovely, calm, and too quiet. No children play cricket in the alleys. No women sit on the back porch and have good gossip. But when we go for a walk in the main shopping district in Birmingham, I am amazed by the different kinds of people. Freckled-faced boys in soccer jerseys, men in business suits, and women in business suits, conservative Muslim women in burqas, and young Muslim women in jeans and headscarves. Sometimes people ask me to take a picture with me. I don't mind. I understand that these are the same people who gave me support when I needed it and who give me courage now to keep going. It's odd to be so well known, but to be lonely at the same time. At my new school, I wear a British schoolgirl's uniform, a green sweater, striped button-down shirt, tights, and a blue skirt. A handful of Muslim girls in my class wear their skirts down to their ankles, as I do. Other girls roll their skirts up even shorter as soon as they arrive at school. I think, what an interesting country this is, where some girls are free to cover their bodies and others are free not to. Here, we also have projectors and laptops, videos and Wi-Fi, and classes such as music, art, and computer science, and even cooking, which I dislike. Sometimes I wish I were back home in Pakistan, where school was just a teacher and a chalkboard. Other times I feel sad that my old friends don't have all this fancy technology and these special classes. But then I remember that they have what I don't, one another. My new schoolmates and I don't always get one another's jokes, and I cannot be as free or as cheeky as they can. I am a good girl, I always have been. But now, I tell myself, I must take extra care with what I say and do. A lot of people are counting on me. In Pakistan, I was just Malala. Here, at least at the beginning, I was Malala, the girl who was shot by the Taliban. I wanted to just be Malala again, a normal girl. Yes, I have seen and experienced things that my new friends couldn't even imagine. But as time went on, I realized they have had experiences I can't imagine. What I'm finding is that we have much more in common than we have different. And every day we learn something new from one another. Every day I feel a little bit more like plain old Malala, just another girl in the class. Until we can go home to Pakistan, we can bring it to us when friends and family come to visit. My mother is happiest with extra chairs around the dinner table. As her happiness grows, so does her willingness to try new things. She has begun to learn English again. She has even allowed herself to be photographed. My father may not be a school principal anymore, but he still goes to conferences on girls' education and speaks out for peace. At first, it was strange to him that people wanted to hear from him because of me, and not the other way around. Malala used to be known as my daughter, he says, but I am proud to say that now I am known as Malala's father. My father, meanwhile, had taken on a new responsibility at home. I teased him that while he and I were busy speaking about women's rights, my mother is still doing the cooking and cleaning. Now he cooks every morning. It's the same thing every time. Fried eggs. He cook his cooking may not be full of flavor, but it is full of love. As the first anniversary of the shooting approached and journalists began to interview me, I discovered that I was not nearly as upset as some of them were about what had happened to me. I guess I see my situation differently. If you tell yourself, Malala, you can never go home because you are the target of the Taliban, you just keep suffering. I look at it this way. I can see, I can hear, I can talk. I am living the life God wants for me. The journalists also ask if I'm afraid. I say no, and that is true. I'm frustrated when journalists want to focus on the attack rather than on my fight for girls' education. I understand it, but in my mind, out of the violence and tragedy came opportunity. I never forget that opportunity, especially when I think about the organization that I started to help other kids, Malala Fund, and remember all of the good things it has done and will do. We are helping girls in SWAT who have no education because they were forced to work. We are helping refugee children all over the world. It's our duty to help these children get food, shelter, and an education, and we will. I think of the world as a family. When one of us is suffering, we must all pitch in and help. Because when people say they support me, they are really saying they support girls' education. So, yes, the Taliban shot me, but they can only shoot a body. They cannot kill my beliefs, and they cannot stop my campaign to see every child in school. I am still here for a reason, and it is to use my life to help people. So on the other page now, the poster. What is Malala Fund? As I was recovering from my attack, my father and I knew that we needed to find a way to continue our fight to help girls in need and get a free, safe, and high quality education. Girls just like me. That was the beginning of the Malala Fund. As people reached out wanting to help us, we gathered their generous donations and put them toward our cause. Our first gift was to help 40 girls in my home, Pakistan's Swat Valley. Through Malala Fund, we were able to give them money for uniforms, shoes, materials, and much more. When we gave that gift, we set a goal that we would someday reach. When we gave that gift, we set a goal that we would someday reach 40 million girls. We are now on our way. What began with just 2 people speaking out for what we believed was right has become a worldwide effort involving thousands and thousands of girls. We have opened schools, including one in Lebanon for Syrian refugee girls, met with dozens of prime ministers and presidents, and most important, connected with thousands of girls so that we could share their stories with the world. Chapter 20, One Girl Among Many. For my 16th birthday, I was given the most extraordinary gift. I was invited to speak at the United Nations in New York City. On that day, July 12, 2013, which the UN had named Malala Day, 400 people would be in attendance, high-ranking officials from all over the world, as well as ordinary children like me. It would be so different from the fearful birthdays I had spent in Pakistan not long ago. My whole family traveled to New York. We saw Annie on Broadway, and we stayed in a hotel where they bring pizza to your room on a silver tray. I liked the hustle and bustle of New York compared with sleepy Birmingham, and I felt as if the city were my old friend after seeing it on Ugly Betty. I couldn't wait to tell Muniba. America is a very nice place, but New York was just as loud and crowded as other cities I've seen, with its honking horns and people rushing here and there. It didn't seem possible that I was going to address the United Nations. I dressed slowly that morning, putting on my favorite pink shalwar kameez and one of Benazir Bhutto's scarves. Then I stood up and spoke not just to the audience, but to every person around the world who could take courage from my words. Dear brothers and sisters, do remember one thing. Malala Day is not my day. Today is the day of every woman, every boy, and every girl who has raised their voice for their rights. Thousands of people have been killed by terrorists, and millions have been injured. I am just one of them. So here I stand, one girl among many. I speak not for myself, but for all girls and boys. I raise up my voice, not so that I can shout, but so that those without a voice can be heard. Those who have fought for their right to live in peace, their right to be treated with dignity, their right to equality of opportunity, their right to be educated. On the 9th of October 2012, the Taliban shot me on the left side of my forehead. They shot my friends too. They thought that the bullets would silence us, but they failed. And then out of that silence came thousands of voices. The terrorists thought that they would change our aims and stop our ambitions, but nothing changed in my life except this. Weakness, fear, and hopelessness died. Strength, power, and courage was born. I am the same Malala. My ambitions are the same. My hopes are the same. My dreams are the same. One child, one teacher, one book, and one pen can change the world. As I heard the applause and took my seat, all I could think of was that I had come a long way from being Malala the toddler, giving lessons to the empty chairs at the Kashul school, or Malala the girl who gave speeches to the bathroom mirror. Somehow, by the grace of God, I really was speaking to millions of people. I had once asked God to make me taller. I have realized that God had answered my prayers, making me as tall as the sky, with a voice that can reach people everywhere. With my height, I have been given a responsibility and a gift. The responsibility to make the world a more peaceful place, which I carry with me every moment of every day, and the gift to be able to do so. Peace in every home, every street, every village, every country. This is my dream. Education for every boy and every girl in the world. I am Malala. My world has changed, but I have not. Epilogue. The youngest person ever. This word, epilogue, it typically means that's the end of the story, and maybe they write it later, but it's something to finish the story. We'll see what it's about. Maybe it'll explain more about what she's doing now as an adult. Let's see. Epilogue, the youngest person ever. In October 2014, almost 2 years to the day after I was attacked, I received a great honor. I became the youngest person ever. I became the youngest person again ever to be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. I was in chemistry class when I found out. The deputy head teacher came and called me outside. Was I in trouble? I thought. When she told me I had won the Nobel Peace Prize alongside children's rights activist Kalisha Saartfi, I was shocked. I responded very formally. I thanked her for the news and said I was honored. It was only when I saw tears in my teacher's eyes when they congratulated me that the meaning of the news really sank in. Ooh, I'm getting tired. Sorry. Almost finished. Everyone was happy for me, and I was happy too, because the cause that had been part of my life for so long had been recognized in such an important way. Let's go ahead and read the poster. What is the Nobel Peace Prize? Named for scientist Alfred Nobel, the first Nobel Peace Prize was awarded in 1901. Winners are chosen by a committee of 5 people in Norway, but anyone is eligible, no matter who they are or where they are from, as long as they worked to promote peace for the greatest benefit to mankind. Past winners include Martin Luther King Jr., Barack Obama, and Doctors Without Borders. Kalisha Saartfi and I received it in 2014 for our struggle against the suppression of children and young people and for the right of all children to education. The more I learned about Kalasha, I'm probably not saying her name right. Kalash, the more precious it felt to share the award with him. He works tirelessly to rescue children from slavery and child labor. This kind and committed man leads by example, showing that adults have the responsibility to protect children. He shows that love and kindness can make a difference. I am so grateful that the Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to recognize the rights of children. Okay, back to the ceremony. The ceremony itself was beautiful and inspiring. I was happy to be joined by my brave friends from Pakistan, Shasia and Kani, as well as girls I've met while traveling with Malala Fund. They have also had to stand up for their rights. It meant so much to me that we could experience the Nobel ceremony together. I've worked tirelessly in my role as an education activist through Malala Fund. We are growing our work every day, but I know that there is so much left to do. I thank God that I have been given this platform. This is my life's work, my mission, and my dream. So much has changed these past few years. Now I live in Oxford, England, where I attend the university. But I am the same old Malala who is going to school in SWAT. My life has changed, but I have not. If you were to ask my mother, she would say, well, maybe Malala has become wiser, but she's still the same messy girl at home whose shirt is in one place, trousers in another, and who's always crying. I haven't done my homework. Some things, even if they are small, do stay the same. Many of our friends in Pakistan might think we are lucky to live in England, but when you're exiled from your homeland, where your father and forefathers were born, and where you have centuries of history, it's very sad. You can no longer touch the soil or hear the sweet sound of the rivers. Fancy hotels and meetings and palaces cannot replace the sense of your true home. People's love and encouragement give me the energy to continue my fight. I will never give up advocating for peace and education for all. I want to build schools and make sure qualified teachers are in as many places as I can. That is something else that hasn't changed. I am the same stubborn girl who will never give up. That's the end. We have the glossary here, like a dictionary, if you want to look. Whew. That was a great book. We'll have to chat about what we think about it when you finish reading. Thank you for reading this with me.